Hey, welcome. We're about to jump into a really pivotal conflict that in just 20 years completely changed the fate of South Asia. And what's wild is that this wasn't just a war between countries. Nope, this was a corporate showdown between two giant trading companies, one British and one French, that spiraled into a full-blown fight for an entire subcontinent. I mean, just think about that for a second. How on earth does a private company, a business that's just there to make a profit, end up conquering a massive subcontinent? It sounds impossible, right? Well, the answer to that incredible story starts right here, in this intense, two-decade-long rivalry. So, to really get to the bottom of this, we're going to walk through 5 key parts. We'll look at how this whole rivalry got started, cover their first big showdown, unpack a really clever French strategy, watch the final, decisive round, and then we'll break down exactly why the British came out on top. All right, let's dive right in. Before we get to the fighting, we need to set the stage. And the stage for all of this was 18th century South India. And, this wasn't some quick brawl. As you can see here, this whole thing was a long, drawn-out chess match that played out over nearly 20 years, from the mid-1740s all the way to 1763. It was a marathon, not a sprint, fought in 3 very distinct rounds. Now, the most important thing to get here is that this region was not some unified, stable place. The old, powerful Mughal Empire was fading, and that created a massive power vacuum. You had these regional kingdoms like the Carnatic and Hyderabad that were constantly fighting amongst themselves over who was in charge. And for the French and British trading companies, all this chaos, well, it looked like a massive opportunity. And yeah, it really didn't take long for that opportunity to blow up into an all-out war. The first real test came when a conflict thousands of miles away in Europe suddenly spilled over onto the shores of India, and the results were dramatic. So, when Britain and France started fighting in Europe over who should inherit the Austrian throne, their companies in India basically said, okay, us too. The French, led by their really sharp governor, Dupleix, landed the first punch. They captured the super important British port of Madras in 1746. And just like that, the game was on. Okay. Now, this is where it gets crazy. The local Indian ruler, the Nawab of Carnatic, was not happy. He told the French, give Madras back. They said no. So he set his army to take it. And just look at these numbers. The Nawab had 10,000 soldiers. The French had less than 1,000. This should have been a complete wipeout. But it wasn't. That tiny French force absolutely crushed the Nawab's massive army. And this quote here from historian William Dalrymple just nails it. This battle was a massive wake-up call. It proved that European military training, discipline, and technology were just on another level entirely. So, the huge takeaway from this first war was the lesson it taught everyone. It showed, without a doubt, that a small, well-drilled European army could beat a much, much larger Indian one. This exposed just how militarily vulnerable the local Indian states were, and it sparked a really dangerous new idea in the minds of the Europeans. Hey, why are we just trading here when we could be ruling? Which brings us to the Second War. The French governor, Dupleix, saw this new reality and thought, I can use this. He came up with a brilliant and honestly pretty cynical plan. Dupleix's strategy was genius. Instead of trying to conquer territory himself, which is super expensive, he'd just play kingmaker. Think about it. You find 2 local princes fighting over a throne, you pick a side, you back in with your superior French army, and when your guy wins, he owes you big time. He pays you back with money, land, and all sorts of trading perks. It was empire building by remote control, and that is exactly what he did. When fights over secession broke out in both the Carnatic and Hyderabad, Dupleix jumped right in, backing his chosen guys. The British, of course, saw what was happening and panicked, so they immediately backed the other side. And all of a sudden, these local Indian power struggles had turned into a proxy war between Britain and France. For a while, Dupleix's plan was working like a charm. His side was winning everywhere. It looked like the French were about to take over South India. But then, this young, incredibly bold British officer named Robert Clive pulled off a stunning counterattack. With just a tiny force, he made a surprise dash and captured Arcot, the enemy's capital city. It was a massive gamble, and it completely flipped the script. Clive's move really stalled the French momentum. But in the end, what finished this war wasn't some epic battle. It was an accountant's ledger. The French government back in Paris looked at the bills piling up from Dupleix's wars and basically said, This is costing way too much. So, in a shocking move, they called their brilliant governor home and signed a peace treaty, basically handing the win to the British. But that was only round two. The peace didn't last long. When the massive 7 Years' War kicked off in Europe in 1756, it was time for the final round in India. And this time, it was for all the marbles. See, this time around, the British were holding an ace up their sleeve, a huge one. In 1757, Robert Clive won the Battle of Plassey, which gave the British East India Company control over Bengal, the richest province in all of India. Just let that sink in. They could now pay for their wars using India's own money, instead of asking for cash from back home. It was a total game changer. And you can see what a difference that money made. The British Army, now flush with cash, delivered a devastating 1-2 punch. First, they crushed the French at the Battle of Wandiwash in 1760. Then, the next year, they marched on the French capital of Pondicherry and completely destroyed it. It was a total knockout. The Treaty of Paris in 1763 made it official. Sure, the French got their little trading posts back, but here's the catch. They weren't allowed to build walls or have soldiers. They were reduced to being simple merchants living under the watchful eye of the victorious British. The French dream of an Indian empire was officially dead. So that leaves us with the big question, right? Why? After this 20-year slugfest, what were the key reasons the British won so decisively? Let's break it down. In the end, it really boiled down to a few key advantages. The British company was just richer and had a way better navy, which is crucial for moving troops and supplies. They also had 3 major bases: Calcutta, Bombay, and Madras, while the French really only had their one headquarters at Pondicherry. And while the French had the brilliant duplex, the British had a whole bench of talented leaders like Clive and Coote. Finally, the British company was just more independent, whereas the French were too tied to their government back home, a government that, as we saw, got nervous and pulled the plug. So here's a great little summary of the whole conflict. You can see the progression so clearly. The First War, where the power of European armies was first revealed. The Second, which was all about that proxy war of kingmakers. And the Third, where British money and military might delivered that final blow at Wandiwash, sealing their total victory. And all of this leaves us with one last, kind of chilling thought. The French had basically written the playbook on how to use military force to take over parts of India, but the British had perfected it. And now, with their only real European competition knocked out of the ring, the path was wide open for them to turn their attention to conquering the rest of India. The question was no longer if they could do it, but what or who was possibly going to stop them.